Nowadays, before we can even confront the system of white supremacy, we're forced to first fight against our own people that are now defending it. And this is all by deliberate design. In 1968, white social engineering scientists were hired by the Kerner Commission to study the African American population to determine the reason for that decade's unprecedented unified Black protests. They determined that a core aggravating factor was caused by blatant white racism. This finding necessitated that the white establishment abandon its use of the blatant white racist segregation tactics used in the past for maintaining their white social dominance over the Black population. They instead developed more covert oppressive tactics that are no longer easily recognized by their Black victims. We are presently being oppressed by those covert oppressive systems that were developed and implemented when it had become determined that those blatant white racist systems had ran their course. Our ignorance of those modern oppressive tactics that are presently being deployed against us gives our oppressors their greatest power over us. This is why those of us who know must teach African proverb. All that we're currently experiencing amongst our population are by deliberate design. They're the results of the covert white racist systems that are presently being deployed against us. Case, point, and proof. Those among us that we most often call sellouts and traitors were in fact deliberately created. Their mindset were deliberately created through white social engineering. They're the ones that white social engineering scientists calls the Black buffer zone group. They are called that because they literally function as the buffer zone between the Black population and the white establishment. Nowadays, before the Black masses can even confront the system of white supremacy, we're forced to first fight against these Black buffer zone members that have been brainwashed to defend it. Through the white ruling classes' monopoly over the input of societal narratives and media images that are constantly and systematically being fed into the collective minds of the Black population, they deliberately socially engineered millions of Black people to think in ways that places the needs of the white society above that of our own. The weaker the Black person's mental fortitude is, the stronger the brainwashing is. These Black buffer zone members are people like Candace Owens, Jesse Lee Peterson, and many others. However, it should actually come as no surprise that some Black people become self-loathing, given that Black people are taught from an educational curriculum that miseducates us to believe that we have no significant history that predates slavery, and curriculums that withholds most Black racially affirming facts from us throughout our entire educational development. Black people are also demeaned, humiliated, and racially devalued daily by white media propaganda campaigns that constantly subjects us to receiving only the fraudulent, worst possible narratives about ourselves. Under these circumstances, it should be expected that some Black people would become self-hating and will fight against our own people in defense of the white establishment. And it's all by deliberate design. For some Black people, it's the only relief they can find. This psychic adjustment is called disidentification. This is where the painful embarrassment of being Black is lessened by ceasing to identify with our group. No. I'm not condoning the behavior of those weak-minded individuals that become self-hating. I'm merely explaining the truth of their condition. It's never been caused by silly slave syndrome myth. is the result of deliberate white social engineering. It's achieved by subjecting Black people to receiving only the fraudulent worst narratives about ourselves. The white society exclusively and unilaterally writes all Black narratives, and they even control how Black people are depicted within all mainstream media outlets. They therefore literally owns Black people's perception of our collective state. Therefore, Black people's image remains enslaved by the white society. They determined a long time ago that by perpetually negatively distorting what we believe about ourselves, they could demoralize us, divide us, create Black self-loathing, shift Black collective aggressions away from the white society and redirect it against ourselves, thus creating a buffer zone group of Black people that will then fight against our own people in defense of the white society. No group can be constantly subjected to receiving only the fraudulent, worst, demoralizing information about themselves and not suffer some adverse effect. It's not possible. Here's a basic example of how this psychological warfare tactic actually works. Imagine that a crew was out at sea aboard their very own well-functioning ship, and that their ship was being followed by a second ship that was constantly broadcasting derogatory messages to the first ship's crew. Such messages telling them that their ship was lesser, not seaworthy, perhaps slowly sinking, or that their crew was incompetent. With time, the crew constantly receiving the negative, derogatory, demoralizing messages about themselves, being unable to refute nor confirm them, will grow weary, paranoid, and will eventually come to accept the negative assessments being told about themselves. This will eventually cause the targeted crew to become distrustful of themselves, doubtful of themselves, and self-loathing. The taunted crew may even become so besieged by deep feelings of inadequacy and resentment towards their own fellow crew members that many will jump into the sea and swim toward the taunting ship, now believing that the taunting ship is superior, even if their own ship is in fact the superior one. Now, those of us who possess the strongest mental fortitude will remain upon our ship, and we will regard those who are swimming toward the taunting ship as being the sellouts and the traitors. But the truth is that those that are swimming merely possess the weakest mental fortitudes. This entire process was accomplished by constantly subjecting the ship's crew with fraudulent, negative, demoralizing disinformation about themselves. Its weapon was the negative messages and the way that it negatively affected the targeted crew. It's a process with the objective to erode the morale of the targeted population through constant and unrelenting demoralization. By destroying their morale, it can even prevent their will to fight. It's very effective. No group can be constantly subjected to receiving negative, demoralizing disinformation about themselves and not suffer some adverse effect. Within a real world setting, this example is precisely what is being done to Black people through the white media's unrelenting negative depictions of the Black population that amplifies the negative to the point that it distorts our reality. This system is deployed like a massive media marketing campaign that constantly subjects the Black population to receiving only the fraudulent worst narratives and media depictions of ourselves. Within this system, fraudulent Black racially demoralizing propaganda is being pumped unrelentingly into the unsuspecting minds of the Black population without being challenged nor counterbalanced by an equal amount of Black positive, racially affirming information. It conveys the subliminal message that Black people are now our own worst enemies, that we are inferior, and we therefore need whites to govern over our lives. Moreover, that Black people should admire, respect, and trust only whites. This system is extremely effective because when Black people are repetitively presented these noted narratives and messages from trusted white media sources, it can be very difficult to resist its implied propaganda programming, especially when the propaganda is being told daily and so unrelentingly. With time, being unable to refute the constant negative information that's being told about ourselves, many Black people eventually internalizes it and comes to accept it. Many Black people then experiences profound feelings of humiliation, and we even ask ourselves, damn, why we can't get our act together? This unrelenting humiliation then causes many Black people to become demoralized, divided, self-loathing, and resentful towards our own group. In the most extreme cases, many will even attempt to disassociate ourselves from the rest of the Black community. Psychologists call this disassociation is a defense mechanism that evolves to put a distance between themselves and from the pain. Some will make it their personal mission to go out of their way to try to show white people that we're not all bad. These are the ones that becomes members of the Black Buffer Zone group. These members of the Black Buffer Zone group, we've noticed it, they're often intentionally given national media platforms by the white establishment. Because when Black faces are witnessed speaking out against the Black masses in defense of the white society, the impact against the Black population is more profound. These members of the Buffer Zone group don't know that they've been brainwashed. They think that they're functioning based upon their own intellect, but they have in fact been brainwashed through white social engineering. These Black people that insist that they confirm their negative assessment about our racial group based upon their own individual experiences are in fact delusional, because it's not humanly possible to assess the collective state of millions of people based upon anyone's individual experiences. It's not humanly possible. Those false negative perceptions about our racial group were actually deliberately embedded into our minds by the white society that exclusively writes all of our narratives and controls our mainstream media images. This brainwashing scenario is all possible because people are like computers. All you have to do is keep giving them certain information every so often, and you can persuade an entire generation towards an applied objective. Then, to further add insult to injury, to prevent us from figuring out what's being done to our minds and how these buffer zone people are being created, white propagandist has spread the false story of Willie Lynch into our communities. That Willie Lynch myth, that silly myth, is being used to distract us from recognizing the truth of our plighted condition. Because the white society realized as long as they keep our understanding of our collective condition flawed, then all of our liberating strategies and remedies that stem from those misunderstandings will also be flawed. The truth of our plighted condition is directly connected to the white oppressor's monopoly over the input that was fed into our minds. They deploy information warfare against us. Information warfare is when a targeted population is fed false information that are designed to make them think and behave in ways that are against their own self-interest and in ways that instead serves those who are deploying the information warfare. This is the truth of our plighted condition. It has nothing to do with a silly Willie Lynch myth. It's time to wake up to our reality. Our plighted condition is directly connected to the white oppressor's monopoly over the content that are being fed into our minds. It is the only way to free your mind is to recognize the truth of our plighted condition. One love and peace.